Welcome to Competitive CX, the podcast for financial services professionals tackling client experience challenges. If you're passionate about enhancing client experience and driving client satisfaction, you found your new favorite show.
I'm Adam Grainger, and alongside Melanie Aimer and Hamish Taylor, we delve into essential CX strategies and innovations that are shaping the future of client experience in finance.
With our diverse backgrounds in customer experience and financial services, we're going to bring you some real-world insights and thought-provoking discussions to help you navigate the complexities of delivering exceptional client experiences.
Whether you're a decision maker, a marketer, or anyone in a client-facing role in financial services, you'll find valuable takeaways to elevate your organizational CX strategies.
So come on then, subscribe now and join us in transforming client experience and gaining that competitive edge.
Let's dive in. Good morning, afternoon, or evening to wherever you are. Welcome to our podcast series called Competitive CX. In our last episode, we discussed cultures that kick CX down the road. And today we're going to be discussing organizational structures that get in the way of CX. Now, if you're new to our podcast, my name is Melanie Aimer, and for the last 20 years, I've been championing the role of client experience within the different areas of financial services, from capital markets, asset management, private banking, and wealth management. And I'm absolutely not satisfied that in general, financial services organizations are really cracking the challenge of creating great client experiences. And if you haven't joined us before, you haven't heard the great voices of two very experienced innovators who are already making a huge impact in the financial services industry. So firstly, welcome, Hamish.
Hi, Melanie. Good to see you again.
Nice to hear you again. Hamish is an award-winning former CEO whose world-leading customer-led transformation approach has inspired hundreds of companies across 48 countries to rethink their customer approach. And he's been dubbed the master thief, love it, for his track record transferring ideas from one sector to another. Adam, welcome.
Hi, Melanie. Hi, guys.
So Adam Grainger, he leads an organization called Accomplish, who pioneers the measurement of understanding of the key drivers of great client experience that enabled asset management organizations to really pinpoint where their CX either out or underperform. I'll be asking him to bring that sort of thinking into the wider financial services community. And together, we're going to tackle the challenges of client experience in financial services. As always, we of course welcome your views and thoughts. And to do this, please reach out to us directly or leave us a comment. And if you're listening, we'd like to ask you a little favor, and that is to rate and review this episode. Now, we really do hope you're enjoying these podcasts. So today, we're going to cover the topic, organizational structures that get in the way of CX. Who wants to go first, Adam or Hamish?
I think it is your turn,
I think it's probably my turn to go first and give one of my soapbox lectures, and then we'll hand over for the real content to you guys. Yeah, look, it's a great topic, this one. I mean, organizational structure gets in the way of customer experience. Look, I'm sure that ourselves and probably most of the listeners can all provide examples of where customer experience is broken down due to the actions of like one part of our organization, or simply due to a lack of alignment and communication between different functions. And the truth is, look, it's not about criticizing anybody. Each part of the organization is an expert at something, be it technical parts of it or commercial parts. However, we all need to be experts at creating a great customer experience, because for our business, that's our source of revenue. That's what ultimately pays our wages. And the action to create that great customer experience takes place throughout the whole organization, not just the customer-facing bits. Now, in addressing customer experience, we've talked in the past about the importance of leadership from the top. We've talked about creating a clear, simple customer promise at the core on which everyone can hook their activities. And in future episodes, as Melanie said, we're going to look at things like incentives and how they're measured. But I'd argue that just as important is the need to look at your organization structure. Does it help or does it hinder customer experience? This is an area you do need to look at if you want to succeed. And I'm going to focus on one particular aspect of it from my background that I believe is important. So let me take you back. I told you wouldn't get through these podcasts without a toilet cleaner story somewhere. So I'm going to take you back into the world of Procter & Gamble, where I started my career as a brand manager. Now, when Procter & Gamble invented the concept of brand management, They created teams to champion the customer that looked across all the silos within an organization. Each brand manager was in charge of his profit and loss account for the brand that they were in. I know that's different in some industries where brand managers, the colouring in department or the logo cops, but in P&G, you were actually managing the profit and loss account. And they had to surround themselves with a wider team with representatives from all of the functions: procurement, technical packaging, manufacturing, sales, etc. And this team drove the organization's agenda. Now, the big difference between the P&G model and other industries is that in P&G, everybody knows and accepts that brand management takes the lead. It's the culture, it's the working practices, and it breeds leaders as brand managers who often go on to general manager and CEO roles, both within Procter & Gamble and elsewhere. Now, when I moved industries, though, when I took over as head of brands at British Airways, the situation was very different. So Colin Marshall, the chief exec, had set up a brand management function to look across the silos and put the customer at the centre of the business. Unfortunately, the way BA operated made this difficult because BA operations was split between, on the one hand, you've got long haul, big aeroplanes going a long way, and on the other hand, you've got short haul, small aeroplanes going short distances. But clearly, that's not how the customer sees things. The business traveller who's going to Frankfurt one day is in, Club Europe, and if they're going to Singapore the following week, they're in Club World. Now, that was a problem because different parts of the organisation dealing with the same customer. Now, I can't change the BA organisation structure in the same way that most of us can't change our financial services structures. But what we can do is decide how to manage it. So what I was able to do was organise the brand management function around the customer. So instead of having, a division that was about long haul and a division about short haul, I changed the team. So we had 3 groups: Premium, Concorde and First Class; Business, Club World and Club Europe; and the Traveller Brands Economy. And this organisation change allowed me to have teams around me and from the other departments that concentrated on specific consumer groups rather than the way we operated the airline. And by doing this, it changed the way the other functions looked at the customer. And I had to do the same thing when I went to Eurostar. When I changed between business and leisure, I created it. And I would argue we need to do the same thing in financial services. Now, most of us listening in probably don't have the power to change our organisation structures. But there are things we can do to compensate for the silos that exist that get in the way. And I would say this: as long as we mirror the operation structure of our organisation, we will strengthen those silos. So how could we find a way of becoming almost functionally agnostic, if you like? And I would suggest it's the way we operate. Don't talk to the individual functions as functions. Organise yourself around the customer. Invite whoever needs to be at the meetings from all of the relevant functions, rather than picking them off one by one for individual conversations. Okay? That way, you treat it as a customer issue, not an individual functional issue. And if you're in a senior enough position, you can also influence how the individual functions organise themselves and encourage them to organise themselves around the customer as well. So in summary, I think what I'm saying here is, look, of course you can't necessarily change your organisation structure, but there are ways of working that allow a multifunctional approach to the customer. So I would say in summary, it's just stop thinking about the customer in terms of individual products or services or departments that are serving them or touch points that are individual touch points. Think of it as a whole and instead create multifunctional approach to the customer experience as a whole. And then organise your team according to this philosophy. And if you're senior enough, organise the other teams as well. But I guess most of us can't necessarily do that. So that's just a few thoughts on it. It's no, of course we can't change the organisation, but we can work to remove the impact of silos if we really champion the customer right the way through the other part of the organisation. So there you go. There's a few for you to start off with.
I think, Hamish, you might have a job as a CEO of a bank.
I used to have a job as a CEO of a bank, actually, but I gave that one up a few years ago.
So Adam, do you want to share some of your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. So my thoughts when I did my prep for this is that a lot really has been said about this over the years, about how organizational structure can get in the way of CX. And we've all heard the metaphors: silos, fragmentation, handoffs, and most of us working in financial services know exactly what that looks like in practice. The industry has even acknowledged the problem many times over. Poor reports have linked poor CX to internal inefficiencies, to legacy systems and departments that don't talk to each other. And I kind of feel like we all nod along, and yet the problem persists, as common and frustrating as ever. So why is that? And we have this podcast now to think about why is that and what we might be able to do differently. Well, I think it's partly because we've spent years treating the symptoms, the technology, the dashboards, the metrics. I want to come back to something you said, Hamish, in a few moments when we have a little debate about experts and general managers. We've been treating the symptoms down at sort of the expert level without really questioning the structure itself. Because silos aren't just legacy flaws, they're actually maintained. We maintain them unconsciously through KPIs, through internal politics, and through unspoken turf wars. And, I think we should be honest if we're going to try and solve this problem, that organizational structures, they weren't built for clients. They were built for experts to manage risk, to manage products, to manage internal performance. And in a regulated industry, that makes sense, where, control and accountability are just absolutely vital. But that creates a challenge. The challenge, from my vantage point, is that structure designed for governance doesn't need to result in complexity experienced by clients. And as a result, these structures often lack those multifunction groupings that you're referring to, Hamish. They're crucial because they manage linkages between teams. So we end up, where we end up is needing to sort of confront, I think, a deeper truth. The real CX alignment may require us to rethink power, control, and comfort. And that, without doing that, this problem won't go away. It's just going to change shape. I want to look at sort of a real world example for a moment. Let's talk about a customer applying for a mortgage. All right. Let's imagine we're that customer. You're excited. You're anxious. It's a milestone moment that could shape your future. But what they can often get is an internal relay race. Lending asks one set of questions, credit asks another. And if something goes wrong, collections step in. And each department is doing their job, but the client has to retell their story over and again and feel like a sort of a stranger each time. Yet from the inside, it all makes sense. Those of us who've sort of grown up in the industry, we all know the swim lanes very well. We know the compliance steps. We know the system limitations. But the client doesn't see any of that. They don't see any of those departments. They just see a single brand. And there's that word again, Hamish, that you mentioned so many times. And every inconsistency between what one team says and what another team says, it just chips away at trust in that brand. So here's where I think the conversation often stalls. We say we want to be customer-centric, but we rarely actually define what it will cost to achieve that. Because to truly align the client journey, someone or some team may need to rethink decision boundaries, otherwise known as responsibilities. They may need to shift some ownership, or they may need to change how success is achieved, those multifunction capabilities that you mentioned, Hamish. And that's not easy when you think about all of those turf wars, internal politics, regulatory reporting, all of those things. But it's necessary. It's necessary if we're serious about delivering the promises that we make to clients in ways that preserve accountability while reducing client friction. So, especially now as frameworks like the UK's Consumer Duty push us to deliver outcomes that are clear, fair, and not misleading. Yet these are not new regulatory words, and they are the same outcomes that clients want, and they've wanted the same outcomes that clients have wanted for years. So, linking forward to what you were saying, Melanie, about a future episode with regulation, CX isn't a trade-off with compliance. It's a way to deliver it more meaningfully. So let's, as I get to the end of my allotted time, let's think about how we might be able to move forward. Well, I don't think it starts with another reorganization. I don't think that's the way to address the organizational challenges. I think it starts much smaller and more honestly than that. I would encourage our listeners to ask each team involved in the client journey to write down how they think the journey flows, and then to compare the maps, and then ask them how they're measured, and then ask them how those measures reflect what the client actually values. Because that's where I believe the disconnect lies, not just in the process, but in the purpose. So the thing I want to leave us all with is, a question. What part of your structure does the client have to navigate that they shouldn't even know exists? Because I think until we're ready to answer that question and really act on it, then we're not really client-centric. I would say at best, we're sort of client adjacent.
I think you've raised a really interesting bit there about the relationships between the different topics that we've been covering off through these discussions, because you're right. The organization structure can't be looked in isolation from what's going on with the regulator, as you said. I added a bit about culture and the culture from the top. As I say, at Procter & Gamble, the reason that organization worked was because the culture said the brand manager or the person who owns the customer experience has to lead the way and has to be. I'm not sure financial services is there yet. And I mean, there are many financial services institutions, as Melanie, I'm sure, coming in a minute, who don't have somebody like a Melanie at a senior enough level in the organization to actually make sure that does happen. And until the organization at a very senior level recognizes the importance of this, the organizations will stay the way they are now.
So that, to me, was the really glaring thing listening to you, glaringly good. And I think you may have identified as something really important. You were talking about general managers when you were at P&G. And I think our financial services listeners will be like,
what's
what?
A general manager?
I mean, what's a general manager? We don't have general managers in financial services. Everyone is an expert. They're all an expert. I deal with this stuff. This is my stuff. Nobody's employed and promoted and incentivized to actually put their arms around the whole lot.
I'll come in here and say that if I think about what I've done within some of the banks I've worked in, I'm almost that sort of sewer or the conductor across the whole organization.
The general management piece.
General manager, and I'm always looking at the customer continuum. But practically speaking, if you don't have someone like myself in an organization, going to what Hamish was saying, what do you do to try and overcome that? And the best way that I've done that before and that I've seen others do that is by appointing a client journey owner.
Yeah.
Right. And it really works quite well. If you put a client journey owner and saying, right, you own that whole journey end to end.
Yes.
Then it means that you're actually effectively creating that general manager by giving an appointing that person as that spokesperson or the champion. So that's one practical way. The other practical
that's not a million miles away from where my mind was going, thinking about, just practical management of the journey.
But I think also, sorry, just to come in there, Melanie, I was going to say, before you move off the customer journey piece, for me, also, it's recognizing that the customer journey is not just the physical touch points. It's the customer's mental journey that really matters. How are they thinking and feeling and reacting at each stage of that process? And you're right, if you can get somebody that owns that, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And also the bad parts of that. In other words, when the path is not just the happy path, the unhappy path as well, right? So I think client journeys and the client journey owners. And by the way, I have worked in a bank where we were instituting a new organization around client journey. So it is possible, even though the legal structures of a bank, you may not be able to change because those are defined by often how the regulator has asked banks to be arranged, especially in the UK. The second practical thing I've done in the past is identifying client personas. Another thing you can do is you can start to organize people and those client journeys around a different sort of persona. And I'm thinking about, you can design a journey around and saying, okay, here's a persona, an ultra high net worth persona. This person, here's the behaviors. He has all the sorts of things that he or she might consume across your whole organization, rather than thinking about product by product by product. I had a strange situation where we had a particular client who was a billionaire, also had a premium account, and the bank couldn't see that person as one person. So even though the client journeys, we had a custom continuum for them, and we even had those client personas, we still had a problem whereby we closed that client's persona, the premium account, right? Because we said, sorry, but you don't have enough money. You can't afford to have a premium account anymore with us. And yet on the other side, he had a private bank account, right? So how do you address something like that? And that's through data. If you can see in your data and you can sew up your data within an organization, you start to use your data internally to tell you, hang on, that client has a premium account, is a corporate investment banking a client as well as a business banking account holder, as well as a private bank account holder, you'll make decisions very differently for that group.
Don't tell this person he hasn't got enough money.
Crazy. It's absolutely data. And then I think in the asset management industry, what's really good there is you often have what you call a client group who's trying to be the sower. Or in capital markets, you often have a relationship management teams who are trying to be a conductor across the organization, right? And I think that is really important to driving that continued, or what I think about a continuum experiences, and start to bring that to replace where people
I think it's interesting when you say about having a conductor, which I think is absolutely right. It's very similar to the brand management model I was describing from consumer goods. But I think what you've just highlighted is it's not enough just to have that conductor. If you don't have the data and information flows down to the front line from that, it'll fail anyway. And I could give you like airline examples like your one of, people that's, gold card holders having to pay for their seat on a flight because the guy didn't realize they were a gold card holder or whatever. It happens in organizations when the information flows don't work, even if you got the organization piece right.
Yes. Although if I may say, if you haven't got your basic data like that in order, you're going out of business, not because of your CX.
Well, look, guys, I think there is really practical tips we've given to our listeners about what they can do despite how their organization might be arranged, whether in asset management or in banking or in any sort of industry, and borrowing, as the Master Thief has done from the outside of banking industry. So thank you you both for contributing your ideas and for this discussion.
Long live the general manager.
And up that toilet example.
Yeah, I did. I'll work on some more for future episodes as well, actually. I might let you off the hook and turn you into dishwashing instead. We'll see.
BA flatbeds are in the news again this week. Well done, sir.
Yes, I think they finally got around to refurbishing the ones I put in 1997, yes.
Well, look, for our listeners, I just want to say thank you for joining us. We do hope you found this discussion really helpful and that you'll join us for future episodes. Who would want to miss out on a dishwasher episode or future cleaning episode? Look, and we really want to hear from you as listeners. If you have subjects you want us to debate or discuss, we really welcome them. Please also share with us directly or share in the comment section. If you like this episode, as I started, please can you share it now with a colleague or a friend, especially for those that will find it useful for what they do in their day-to-day. Now, in the next episode of Competitive CX, we will cover incentives that inadvertently deprioritize CX. So don't miss out. And we're all wishing you a good day and hope you too can go and create a competitive CX.
Thanks a lot.
Nice one, guys. See you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Competitive CX, the podcast dedicated to insights for financial services professionals tackling client experience challenges. We hope you found valuable strategies for enhancing client engagement in your organization.
If you enjoyed the discussion, please subscribe to Competitive CX and leave a rating and a review. Your feedback helps us reach more finance professionals seeking to overcome their CX challenges.
And you can stay up to date with the latest in client experience by following us on LinkedIn for resources designed to help you innovate and improve financial services.
Join us next time as we continue exploring how to transform client experiences in finance. Until then, keep pushing boundaries and striving for excellence in the client experience.